As our community has grown, the district has completed nearly 75% of its master plan, including projects like this, the Red Rock Detention Basin. And though times have changed, one thing has stayed the same from the start, our message. And in this Best Of episode of the Flood Channel, we'll take a look back at some historic segments about how making smart decisions before and during flash flood season can keep you safe and keep your home protected. Whether in 1999 or the storms we saw last summer, educating the public about the dangers of flash flooding has been a top priority for the district. And though our methods may have changed, the message has stayed the same.
Tony DeVito has worked as a barber in the Valley for 26 years, clipping and shaving thousands of heads of hair. He's seen it all, especially Las Vegas's evolution from a small cow town to a thriving metropolis. But despite the Valley's changes, he gives clients a word of advice.
You see any high water, you stay away from it.
He's talking about when the Valley floods. Through the years, he's seen this arid desert, his home, turn into a raging river in a matter of minutes.
I remember one time I was at Tia Latin and couldn't get home, and so, but that was 26 years or just when I got here. Lights went out and everything was flooded. I mean, Flamingo, you name it, and it was flooded.
And it's happened many times before. Even as early as 1910, a rainstorm turned ugly, transforming the desert into a flood zone. Back in December 1959, heavy rains caused accidents around the valley. And in August 1960, one person was killed, and there was significant damage in Henderson. In September of 1961, a hail and windstorm produced major flooding, killing one person, injuring 31, and severely damaging the Las Vegas Strip. Flood events continued through the 60s, causing millions of dollars in property and road damage.
But I can remember as a child seeing flood after flood. I mean, the streets of our city were filled with floodwaters on many, many occasions. And of course, the Charleston underpass always got flooded out. And that was one of the few arterials that you could use in those days to go from one side of town to the other.
And things got worse. In September of 1974, severe flooding hit the El Dorado Canyon and Nelson's Landing, causing death and destruction.
Mobile homes moved by floodwaters, marble-sized hail, basements filled to the roof with water. The September storms hit just about everyone in the valley. Henderson, the east end of Las Vegas, Sunrise Mountain, Moapa, Overton, and Bunkerville were hit the hardest.
The storm on September 11th moved across the eastern part of the valley, and the rainfall occurred in all of the main washes. And so you had runoff occurring in all the main washes at the same time. And so that was why it was fairly unusual. Previous storms that we've had in the valley may hit one or two of the washes, but not all of them at the same time.
Damage was most severe in Moapa Valley and Overton, rural communities about 60 miles northeast of Las Vegas. Residents in Bunkerville suffered major flood damage to their homes. In the Overton area, 13 homes were severely damaged, and 2 mobile homes in the Glendale-Moapa area were completely destroyed by flooding. Beginning with El Nino in February, the wettest February on record, our valley received almost 3 inches of rain all in 1 month. In July, almost 4 feet of water flooded Western Road just south of the Charleston underpass. The underpass also flooded. Boulder City and Henderson saw close to $5.4 million in storm damage back in August. Also in August, rain severely damaged 10 homes in Mesquite. Near the airport, one of the flood control channels raised 7 feet of water in just 13 minutes. This just 3 days prior to the September flood.
The rainfall was intense. Most of it fell within an hour and a half. Some places recorded more than 1.5 inches of rain in just 30 minutes. By the time it stopped, parts of the valley were soaked with more than 3 inches of rain. It may not sound like a lot, but because Las Vegas has poor soil and lots of erosion, that amount of rain causes drastic flooding.
If that same rain were to fall in almost any other part of the country, it would not cause the same problems that we have here.
Channels and basins like these kept the floodwaters out of many areas of town. The Regional Flood Control District has finished 1/3 of its master plan. Many say if those parts weren't finished, the whole valley would have been one big lake.
We estimate that the damages would have been 4 to 5 times greater if it wasn't for what the Flood Control District has implemented with the entities to date.
The flood caused more than $20 million in damage, but without the current flood control measures, it easily could have topped $100 million.
It doesn't get much worse than this. The severe monsoon-like flooding that inundated Clark County July 8th, that turned streets into fast-moving muddy rivers, pushed flood control district facilities to the limit.
The flood control facilities that are out there right now, as far as the detention basins raising 10, 12 feet in 3 to 7 minutes, is catching that water, and that water is not finding its way through an urban area right now. So what's out there, I think, is working good.
These pictures tell a story. A 100-year flood event. That means we have a 1% chance of a storm like this in any given year. These pictures, too, tell a story. Not as dramatic, but an important story nonetheless. This is the Red Rock Detention Basin, a massive flood control district funded facility that captures water racing from the western mountains toward Las Vegas. But that water never coursed through Las Vegas. It stopped here. It stopped here, too. This is the South Gowan Detention Basin in northwest Las Vegas. The water here was 21 feet deep and came within 1.5 feet of spilling over. This water never reached the fire station, hospital, or nursing home just downstream. The Oakey Detention Basin did as it was designed to, preventing water from washing through Opportunity Village and a nursing home just downstream. With rainfall totals from 2.5 to 3 inches of rain in less than 90 minutes, some thought the impromptu lakes were ideal recreation spots. Not a good idea. A flood channel where the water can rise as quickly as 7 feet in 8 minutes is no place to play. This is not clean rainwater anymore. By the time it hits here, it's polluted with oil from the street, fertilizer from the yard, and everything else along the way. In addition to the obvious health hazard, the fast-moving waters can also be deadly.
The water rushed down, looking like a muddy Niagara Falls. Parts of the valley that are normally dry were now raging rivers, the rolling water destroying everything in its path.
As the heavy rain started to descend upon the valley and the first reports of flooding were received, we quickly realized that this was a very great storm and potentially one of the greatest storms to hit this area.
This area along Duck Creek Wash was hit hard. The water washed away the ground and knocked down these walls.
This is the road that went across, and you can see what happened to the road. Completely washed away, the force of the water.
But MJ Harvey and these neighbors know it could have been worse. The Flood Control District built this bridge so residents would have a road out if the waters got too high. And these rocks were just recently placed here to help reinforce the natural channel.
I shudder to think. I really do. I shudder to think because there was no protection here before.
But until the Flood Control District makes all the improvements, these neighbors won't feel safe when it rains.
Everybody's upset and scared to death. What will happen in the next time?
The Duck Creek Wash is one of the next areas to be improved, but it will take time and money. Overall, though, the district says the flood proved the current system works. Now it just needs to be completed.
It further reemphasizes in my mind the need for us to continue down the path that we've started down and try to get there as quick as possible.
And everyone will agree, the quicker, the better.
In August 2003, an incredibly intense thunderstorm battered the valley, dropping up to 3 inches of rainfall in about 90 minutes of time. Especially hard hit was Gowan Road near US 95 in the northwest part of the valley, where the storm developed and hovered. The runoff from this storm turned many roads into raging rivers. Some of the flood district's rain gauges measured rainfall totals that exceeded those of a 100-year storm, which is the standard the district uses to size drainage facilities in Clark County. It was estimated the water flowed down Gowan Road at US 95 at an incredible 3,000 cubic feet per second. Or to look at it another way, imagine a basketball packaged in a box. With every passing second, 3,000 of those boxes would be floating past you. That's how much water was raging down Gowan Road. While there were no major injuries reported as a result of this storm, there were a number of both helicopter and swift water rescues. Thousands of commuters were trapped and/or confined by the floodwaters. The city and county reported close to $2 million in damages to roadways, public and private property. One house was completely destroyed, and almost 60 other homes had significant damage as a result of this flood. The devastation could have been worse, if not for the fact that some flood control facilities were completed and in place in the area, capturing upwards of 400 acre-feet of runoff. That compares to a football field with 400 feet of water on top of it. In fact, without those completed facilities, the flows in Gowan Road, instead of just 3,000 cubic feet per second, would have been more than 10,000 cubic feet per second. We know that the significant flooding and damage that resulted was not due only to the intense precipitation, but also to the fact that several flood control channels on the drawing board were not yet built.
2012 was an incredibly active flash flood season in Clark County and throughout the Southwest, really. As some measure to reflect that, the National Weather Service issued over 200 flash flood warnings.
I think what made this unusual is that 3 events happened in quick succession right over the city. Happened to impact a lot of people, and I think that made it obviously more memorable for everybody and had a higher impact on them.
August 22nd, we had the first of the large storms. Late in the morning, we had some storms move across from the southwest to the northeast, mainly across the Henderson area. We had 9 gauges that measured over 2 inches of rain in about a 4-hour period, another 24 that measured over 1.5 inches, and we had 1 gauge that measured over 3 inches of rain that day in the Henderson area. When you look at that amount of rain over a large urban area, you get a lot of runoff.
That amount of runoff can cause flooding. Several roads were closed because of the amount of water running through the area. Channels were flowing full as the district's flood control network helped to drain the water to Lake Mead.
The September storm was completely different from the August storm. We had very intense rain, not as much of it, but it moved directly across the valley from west to east. It was actually the wettest September day ever recorded by the Weather Service in Las Vegas. We had close to 1.2 inches of rain in about a 2-hour period. All of the washes, all of the streets had water flowing in them, and it all came to a head down at the Desert Rose Golf Course. We had a lot of water in the Las Vegas wash and a lot of water in the Flamingo wash, and Desert Rose is at the confluence of those 2 major washes. And just the timing of those peak flows in those washes caused some damages.
The Desert Rose Golf Course and UNLV were some of the hardest hit areas. There were multiple reports of stranded drivers and nearly 80 reports of properties that sustained flood damage.
October was a very unusual storm. It was more of an intense winter storm than your typical summer storms. We were fortunate that the most intense part of that storm occurred in the middle of the night, when there weren't a lot of people on the streets. We had 18 of our rain gauges in the Las Vegas Valley measured over 2 inches of rain throughout the day. We had over 6 reported more than 1 inch of rain throughout that storm. But yet, there were few, if any, damages. There were a couple of homes along the Desert Rose Golf Course that had some water in them, but nothing of the scale that we saw in September.
Since 1986, we've never seen this many large, intense storms in a single monsoon season in southern Nevada. The impacts could be felt from Laughlin to Mesquite. Throughout the summer, there were countless reports of people making questionable decisions near floodwater. Videos of people playing in channels filled with rushing water and motorists driving through flooded intersections were shown on local news stations and online. One lesson we can take from this summer is that floodwater is dangerous, no matter what.
People need to be aware of their surroundings and just stay away from floodwaters. We saw that over and over again throughout the summer. Floodwaters are dangerous, always. Once you enter a flood channel, when it's flowing, it's inescapable. You cannot get out. Learn from that learn from what we know about where it's raining and avoid problem areas. Watch it on the news. Don't be on the news.
The district's mission is to protect life and property, and from the beginning we've educated residents about the dangers of flash floods. And another message we've frequently emphasized is the importance of flood insurance. And with flash flood season beginning in July and ending in September, you might find that flood insurance is a great investment to protect your home.
Mucky mud, broken bricks, and filthy floors. That's what's left of this house after a devastating flood swept right through it. Insurance agent Bill Humphrey knows many homeowners could literally get stuck in the mud if they didn't purchase flood insurance. That's because your regular homeowner's insurance doesn't cover floods. So if Mother Nature hits, you have no insurance protection.
A lot of people who experience flood damage they suffer for a long time.
That's why Jeannie Reefer with the State Floodplain Management recommends everyone buy insurance. Humphrey also suggests you call the city or county and find out if your home lies in a flood zone.
If you live here very long, you know we do have floods here. And you need to know where the flood zones are. And you should make sure that if you're anywhere close to one, you probably are a candidate for having flood insurance.
A couple of things to keep in mind about flood insurance. You are eligible no matter where you live, either in or out of a flood zone. If your property has been flooded before, you can still purchase insurance. And finally, flood insurance doesn't go into effect until 30 days after you buy it.
Newer neighborhoods like this one are being built with flood drainage systems like this. But always remember, Mother Nature can be unpredictable.
If your house is in a flood zone, your insurance rates will depend on the elevation of your house's lowest floor. If your house is not in a flood zone, insurance rates are cheaper. They can run as little as $200 a year to an average of $600. For example, if your house is worth $100,000 and is not in a flood zone, then flood insurance for a year would be about $221. And it would protect not only your home, but your belongings inside.
If their whole house gets flooded, the National Flood Insurance will pay up to $100,000 on that particular policy, or whatever amount you buy. And there's also 25% included for your content. So your contents would be covered for $25,000 under that particular plan.
In fact, about 30% of federal flood claims come from property that is not in a flood zone. Now, if you did not purchase flood insurance and your house got hit, you would probably pay a lot more. Even though you may be eligible for a federal loan, interest rates still run between 3 and 8%. That means you could easily be paying more than $3,000 a year to pay off the loan. But if you had insurance, it would have only cost you a couple $100.
You can never replace your things that you've lost, you know, like your home, your furniture, so on and so forth. But at least if you have flood insurance, you can get started again and you can move forward.
Insurance rates are cheaper here than in many areas thanks to improvements made by the Regional Flood Control District and the community. The federal government gives discounted rates to areas that do more than the minimum standards for flood prevention. The communities here have done a lot, including requiring the lowest part of a building to be elevated higher than standard construction guidelines. The district also spreads the word about flooding hazards through pamphlets, billboards, and programs like this one. In all, it's added up to a 5 to 15% decrease in rates in the valley. But Humphrey says despite all the warnings, most people here don't buy flood insurance. They don't think they'll need it. Unfortunately, a lot of these homeowners didn't think they would need it either.
The old adage is when you buy insurance, you're worried about the price, but when you have a loss, you're worried about the coverage.
As we've heard, if you do buy a house in a flood zone, you are required to buy flood insurance. Rates vary depending on how hazardous the area is, the elevation of the home, and the likelihood of flooding. During the span of a 30-year mortgage, a home in a floodplain has a 1 in 4 chance of suffering from a 100-year flood event. But even if your house is not in a flood zone, you can purchase flood insurance and it will cost less. It's available to every homeowner, even if you've been flooded in the past. In fact, 30% of federal flood claims come from property that is not in a flood zone. The rates for insurance are cheaper in Clark County than in many other areas of the nation, in part because of the higher standards and regulations for building houses. If you are not in a flood zone, rates run from $200 to $600 a year. If you are in a flood zone, you can expect to pay more.
With every completed project, Southern Nevada is better protected from flooding, and property may be removed from a flood zone. But even if your home is not in a flood zone, you can still purchase flood insurance. And with that 30-day wait on a policy, the time to consider purchasing flood insurance is right now.
Removal of a flood zone can save residents money in flood insurance premiums, and many homeowners may no longer want to carry flood insurance. But there are some important factors to consider when making such an important decision. Flood damage to your home or property is not covered by a standard homeowner's insurance policy. Special flood insurance is required for those claims. A flood can quickly cause thousands of dollars worth of damage. The Regional Flood Control District is hard at work removing areas throughout the county from flood zones, but other factors you should be aware of can cause flooding. A blocked easement or drainage pathway near your home can cause water to back up in your yard or neighborhood. It's important to survey homes, businesses, and streets nearby. If you find a blocked easement on your property, try to clear it. Or contact your homeowners association if a blocked easement is somewhere in your neighborhood. You can also contact your local county or city public works department for assistance. It is also important to understand the geography surrounding your property. Are you near the bottom of a hill? Is your home built at the end of a cul-de-sac where water may tend to pool after a heavy storm? FEMA also recommends knowing when your home and neighborhood were constructed. Requirements for easements and drainage ways have changed over the years. If a street near your home has experienced major flooding, be aware of what protects your property. A block wall may separate your home from the street, but how old is it? How well constructed? Or are there any damaged areas that could give way during a flash flood? There are many factors to consider when deciding whether to purchase flood insurance. Only you can make the best decision for your family, but if you wait too long, it may be too late.
Folks didn't know that there was flood insurance that is available to them at a reasonable cost if in fact you're hit by a flood and you have the damage. It costs about $200–300 a year for $250,000 worth of coverage. And most of the folks don't realize that. They feel that if they don't live in a flood zone, they don't need it. But the truth of the matter is we never know where that cell's going to be in the sky and where the waters are going to flood down. And it's a good idea to check out to see whether or not it's prudent for you to have insurance.
The Flood Control District knows there's a lot of confusion about flood insurance. The district is working to make sure residents living here in the desert understand it's up to them to decide if flood insurance is a good investment for their home, whether they live in a flood zone or not. The district hopes that by providing the right tools, residents can make an educated decision. A regular homeowner's policy doesn't cover flood damage caused by storms. Anyone can buy flood insurance, whether you are in a flood zone or not.
FEMA's mission is to reduce the loss of life and the loss of property for events that could be either man-made disasters or natural disasters. Man-made disasters are obviously the terrorist threats. The natural disasters are hurricanes, earthquakes, flooding, things of that sort, whereby we do respond and we do go out to try to protect the public, property, and lives. And we do this by way of an emergency system that involves a number of components: protection, prevention, response, recovery, and mitigation. It's a risk-based type of a emergency system that we do put in place, and we respond to all kinds of disasters that way. And it's a very important component of FEMA. When you compare having an insurance product versus reliance on a federal disaster assistance, well, an insurance product is going to respond whenever the peril occurs. So whenever it floods, you're going to get paid. If you're relying on federal disaster assistance, then it's only if it's a major disaster, whether it's a presidential declaration, that you might qualify for disaster assistance. Okay. So yes, they can get disaster assistance, but it's minimal. The max that's available to them is $28,200, but that's not what everybody gets. Most people get a lot lower than that. So if you're sitting there with a $500,000 house and you're saying, I don't need flood insurance because the government's going to come in and take care of me. Let's say you do get the full $28,000. That's not going to do much for you, versus $250,000 insurance policy. After a major disaster, you hear these gazillions of dollars that being going into these communities. Well, most of that's infrastructure. That's not for individual homes. That's for roads and churches and highways and schools and all that. That's not for the individual home. And so people hear that and they think, oh, I don't need this. I mean, they're going to come in here and they're going to roll the trailers and they're going to roll the dollars out and they're going to put me back in place. No, they won't. They won't. And it's a sad situation when people get into a situation like that and then they realize how little they're going to get, if anything. You have to change people's behavior. And in order to change people's behavior, it involves education. Well, how do you educate folks? You just blitz them with stuff all the time. You want to get information in front of them all the time. That's what Flood Smart does. And programs like yours will help, because now you're talking about a specific issue. Flood insurance, why it's necessary, here's how you purchase it, here's what it'll do for you, here are the alternatives. You don't want the alternative. And I think that's the message that has to get out.
I originally got my flood insurance about 3.5 years ago, knowing that flooding is possible here in the desert. Having the flood insurance was very important to me to protect my home and my family against damage from these flood events. And especially when it's that muddy, silty water coming through there, you know, if it penetrates through your house, instantly everything is gone.
Most people, you're throwing out your carpet, you're throwing out your padding, doors are getting thrown out, you're looking at taking out all the drywall. If it hits your electrical, now you've got electrical damage. Just a couple of inches can make that much of a difference.
More than anything was the financial aspect of it, to make sure that if there was a flood, knowing that my standard homeowner's policy and auto policies would have nothing to do with coverage during major flood events. And I wanted to make sure that my stuff was covered to be replaced if something were to happen.
You can increase it at any time. You cannot increase it with an impending flood because it's a 30-day wait on a policy. So if you want to increase it, it waits a whole 30 days before that increase takes effect. And if they do that, they have coverage to go in and rebuild. It is a very tragic thing to have your house get flooded. And to have it get flooded and have flood insurance means you have hope.
We have always told you about the dangers of flash floods and that flood insurance is available to everyone. Now it's up to you to make those smart decisions before and during flash flood season. And that's going to do it for another edition of the Flood Channel. Check out our website at www.regionalflood.org for more information. Or you can find us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. And from all of us here at the Flood Channel, we're hoping you make smart decisions this flash flood season, and always remember to be flood safe.